Hello, and welcome to the Horror Writers Association Rhode Island chapter, December readings. We had some conversations in our chapter meeting about doing more readings for this chapter, especially with not being able to be out in person and wanting to spread our talent out to the public. And plus, it is December, which traditionally, if not anymore, hopefully we can bring it back, is spooky story reading season, in addition to many other seasons. But we should not forget that it is also spooky story reading season. So we have a wonderful lineup of phenomenal talent for you that are each going to read about 10 minutes of their work. And without further ado, since we want to stay right on schedule, I'm going to introduce our first reader, Joshua Rex.
Thank you, Christa. I'm going to be reading a story from my first collection, What's Coming For You, if you can see it there. And this is the title story from the book, What's Coming For You. Do you want to talk about what's coming for you? Dr. Daphne Vesper asked. Just to be clear, it's not someone or something, but an implication suggested by feelings. An implication that I'm trying to evade, the patient said. Does that make sense? Perhaps, Dr. Vesper said. Are you comfortable talking about the feelings? The patient was silent a moment. He looked past the doctor out the glass wall, squinting at the crisp daylight filling the high-rise office. The few shadows in the room seemed to have gathered around his sunken eyes and in the scruffy hollows of his cheeks. They're triggers, objects that are loaded with importance, though I can't determine what this importance means. Are the objects from memory? The patient pondered this. They might be, I'm not sure. But you definitely have an emotional response when you see them. Oh, yes. Can you give me an example? Well, on my way here, I saw a rose in one of the rooms down the hall. It was pink-red and on the verge of opening. It was sticking up out of a long beveled vase the color of green sea glass. Actually, the glass could have been colorless now that I think of it. The green could have been from the flower stem. The vase was standing at the center of a polished black marble table. It looked like it was in some sort of conference room, this table, though there were no chairs around it. The doctor said, You know there aren't any rooms like that on this floor. Of course I know that, the patient said. But this time there was. Do you think the rose is connected to some event in your past? I don't believe so, but it did remind me of something. A little heart, yes. It was like the heart of one of those small common animals you see squashed in the street. Did this make you feel sad? See, this is what I'm trying to explain. The rose animal heart was the feeling. You mean it was a metaphor for an emotion? No, that's not what I mean. Dr. Vesper breathed deeply and folded her hands in her lap. So it's these concrete feelings encountered with regularity that are the source of your fear that something is coming for you. Right, but like I said, it's not a something. But you dread them, the feelings, I mean. The patient let out an exasperated sigh. I'm not afraid of the feelings themselves, but what they suggest, which is that I already know the answer, the patient rejoined softly. The doctor was quiet a moment. Her left eye twitched, and at the same moment, so did the patient's. She shrugged off a chill. Give me another example. Well, one time I was walking down one of those historic streets east of downtown when I noticed this big Greek revival house with a wraparound veranda. It was white with green shutters. Or were the shutters black? Yeah, I think they were black, green-black. I guess I can't be sure because I saw the place at night. Anyway, the paint was peeling and yellowed, and there was no house number. The house, the whole property actually, sat elevated about 6 feet or so above the street and was walled by these great granite blocks faced with lime streaked brick. Or maybe it was niter. A wrought iron fence ran atop the blocks. I remember the lawn was eye level when I looked through the gap between the bottom of the fence and the mossy top of the wall. The front gate was of arched iron bars. The shadows of the bars cast by the streetlights ran diagonal across the big stone steps that led to the pillared portico and the black slab door. There was a light on in one of the downstairs front rooms. I couldn't see much within, only eggshell walls and half of a plaster ceiling rose. There was also a black surface, a fireplace mantel, I think, just visible on the far left wall. The whole scene inside and out was like a monolith, wordless, And those gate shadows across the steps, something about it all reminded me of a tomb. Yes, that's it. It was like a tomb standing right there amongst the normal houses. The patient was frowning, his eyes moving along the floor. He seemed to be nearing some crucial revelation, and so the doctor remained silent. So one afternoon, I was at a cafe, and when I reached in my pocket for my wallet, I felt a key. It was one of those old skeleton keys. I knew it belonged to that house. So I decided to go there and try it in the front door, but when I got there, the house was gone. Gone, Dr. Vesper repeated. Yep, just an empty sloping lot. How do you know that the key was for that house? Because it was one of those feelings. Oh, I forgot to say that even though I couldn't see the house, I knew that it was still there. Explain. Well, you know how in memory you can sensorially observe a person, place, or thing that no longer exists? Yes. It's like that. In my mind, I can still feel the key, the house, the rose, though I cannot physically touch them. And those feelings are trying to tell me that something is coming for me, something that I do not want to know. Dr. Vesper was looking past the patient through the glass walls opposite, considering how it was a false barrier, permeable yet solid. I think there might be a parallel between the two paradigms you described. In both instances, there is a fixation on something that is vital, that is the light and the rose, and the doctor broke off as she glanced at the patient, who had become semi-transparent. Mr. Crossman, is everything all right? The patient raised his eyebrows. Yes, why do you ask? Never mind. Dr. Vesper made it sound like she was clearing her throat. I'm sorry, you were saying? Actually, you were saying something about parallels? Yes. The doctor closed her eyes and pressed them with her fingers while she spoke. I believe that these images or feelings, as you call them, are cognates to subconscious memories that you are afraid of consciously recalling because they will reveal the truth about something that you are not prepared to accept. The truth, therefore, is what you fear is coming for you. After a long time with no reply, Daphne Vesper opened her eyes and gasped. The patient was gone. She got up, started toward the door, then turned back and touched the chair where he had been sitting. The fabric was cold. She went out into the hall. Everything was the same. No out-of-place doors or windows, and certainly no conference room with a flower on the table. She didn't know where the patient had gone, but she was glad that he had. He'd spooked her. He had been like one of those bad feelings he described. When she reached her office door, she paused and touched it, reassuring herself of its there-ness before opening it. Beyond the threshold, the walls were eggshell white. The space was filled with a sort of antique glow, though no fixture hung from the plaster ceiling ornament. At the end of the narrow chamber, on the black mantel of a sealed fireplace, stood a desiccated, partly opened rose in a clear vase. The glass had taken on the color of the rust-colored stem, like dried blood. The longer she looked at the flower, the less Daphne Vesper was sure whether it was a rose or the shriveled heart of some small common animal. Thank you.
I was trying to clap, but I was muted.
Me too.
Thank you very much, Josh, for getting us started. And I've read that whole story and that whole collection, and you would be doing yourself a grand disservice if you did not pick it up and finish the story. All right, so Lauren, Elise Daniels is going to be reading next. Take it away, Lauren.
Thank you, Christa. I'll be reading from my first novel, Serpent's Wake, A Tale for the Bitten. For those who forget and want to remember, for those who remember and want to forget, and for those swallowed whole but who survive, even thrived, in the serpent's wake. I'll be reading from part 1, A Sea of Night. Something woke her. Silence. Had the serpent's heartbeat stopped? Thudump. No, but nearly. She stretched a little further here, a little further there. She climbed. She pulled on the remaining tatters of her dress, and carefully, with a bit of twisting and a bit of turning, she found herself reaching the back of the serpent's mouth. With her fingers, she felt teeth, twin rows of curved blades. Thudump. In the darkness to which she'd grown so accustomed, she felt the serpent's thick tongue, a crossroads at midnight. She paused. Don't think, said the voice that's not a voice. With something more brazen than courage, she pushed against the roof of the beast's mouth, listening for that barely beating heart, feeling with every fiber of muscle for the slightest awareness. Nothing. Again she pushed, and the jaw was a stiff, unoiled hinge, but slowly it gave. Her arms trembled, and every few minutes, thudump went that cold, cold heart. With a heave, the girl slid between sheathed fangs. She fell to the ground with a thud, tearing away the last remnant of that dress. She felt the earth on her hands, and in the darkness she moved, but something was caught. Her head was not free. She touched the base of her skull and pulled. Her hair trailed behind her, right back to the lips of the sleeping beast. She shuddered, thinking at any moment the serpent would snatch her up again with finality this time, but it didn't. Instead, she felt the occasional reptilian wash of the sleeping serpent's breath roll across the ground like fog. She blinked, lighting up her own dark now. Both hands on her hair, she turned, and even in that blackness, she sensed it, an immense face shining, the trail of her hair cascading from its mouth like a tongue, and she began to crawl, feeling her way 1 inch at a time, away from the beast, head down, neck and shoulders tight, pulling herself free. Her hair slid from the creature's mouth with each pull, and another inch, another foot, another yard. It sizzled across those scaly lips. Kneeling, she turned to free the last strands, but they were stuck. And so she yanked them from her scalp. And with that, there was movement. She listened, hands tented on the ground. The serpent's head crackled and rose with a sigh. She heard its breath. It gagged, its great fangs flexed in a yawn. And she heard the tongue flick once as the great serpent returned to its repose. The girl pulled on the trail of her hair towards her and wrapped it about her body again and again. She trembled, not from cold. She tucked the damp ends of her hair beneath her arm and rested nose to soil. She flexed her fingers into the earth, pressed her face into it, and steadied herself. And she crept, following a draft, and climbed the trail she believed led to light. With longer limbs than she remembered, she pulled herself along a narrow passageway. She placed her cheek to the ground and heard crows. Something crackled under her palms, and she felt the papery end of the serpent's discarded skin. She coiled it into a ball as she crawled, and it drew her closer to the crows. Up, 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 until tree roots bumped her shoulders. She felt them with her hands and smelled them with her face as she listened with dreadful care back along the cavern. Stillness, no heartbeat but her own, a dizzying sensation. The girl fixed on the crows and crawled. Tiny winter moths twirled about her. She plucked spider webs from her lips and continued again. With the mouth of the cavern in view, she rested in changing light. She rubbed 4 filthy fingers hard against a stony wall, leaving a grimy, tidal ripple of snake. When she met the mouth of the cave, it was banked with a snowdrift, backlit and too bright. She punctured the crust and wiggled a hand in open air. Light crumbled through snow in whitewash. She winced and thrashed a passage with her arms and stepped barefoot into snow. Cold whirled against her, singing of wide open, of excess after all that humid scarcity. She had always felt the cold and remembered blankets piled high in her bed before. She marveled now that she felt no sting in her feet and no ache in her chest as she pulled ravenous breaths. She watched through watery slits as each exhalation barreled into sunlight. With the snakeskin in her arm, she strained to see through wires of lashes a dazzling winter's day. Everything shimmered with prisms, trees, snowdrifts coated in diamonds. The sky ached unbearable blue. She squeezed her eyes shut before trying to take it in again, and when she could crack her eyes, she put a handful of snow to her lips and examined her body. She was skinny and filthy and covered in sores. Her crusty fingers were long like her mother's. Her hair was wound around her body a dozen times. The once black hair shimmered a starlit indigo. Past the snakeskin, she saw blurry toes in the snow far away. She blinked at the white country and focused hard on an immense solitary oak at the edge of the wood. Her father had taught her to spot an oak, and she willed her eyes to behold its expanse, opening her heart to its endurance. That night, in the dark, she listened to the night noises, eyes wide under a full moon. She twinkled with snow dust. She straightened her spine with a crackle. Had she grown another inch this minute? Which way? She closed her eyes and answered, this way. The stars were many. The moonlight was kind to her eyes. Long ago, before, she would have been afraid at night, out walking all alone, but not this night. Not under these stars and this moon so hard-earned, so desperately hers. This night was wholly a word that now surpassed anything she ever thought she knew about it. The sky was gracious. A sea of night shimmered a cosmic welcome so intimate. She trusted that so long as she kept walking, she would find home. Holy. Every step she took, she stretched and grew a little more holy. So long since she'd seen such stars, she spun to meet infinity and walked as if led by the hand. I'm in the dark again, she thought, and what a beautiful dark this is. She wasn't worried about losing her way or freezing to death. She wasn't even cold. I am life in all this darkness. And life itself was surrounded by more. The frosted trees cast sober glances. The great owl spoke in the pines. Icicles held fast in stillness. Once there was only silence, and it frightened her, but now silence had a multitude of voices. You without a face speak to me through dirt and fire. She thought of how she grieved her God, how she mistook silence for absence, and through that voice that was not a voice, she heard, I bear all. And that's when she heard it. A wolf, and then a pair, and then a choir. A pack burst the night, and she was not afraid. She knew their voices. You are ours, we are we. And she walked, each step lighter, filled with night. She had mountains of treasure after such season of want. She slipped across the snow like a spirit, listening to the wolves until they faded. She moved across the hills, following an arc of stars that pulled her homeward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And again, talk about enticing people, starting us out with your novel. Everyone should want to read that as well. Okay, so let me... Sorry, just one quick second here. Okay, so our next reader is going to be Jason Parent. And I am unsure of what you're going to read, so you can introduce that, and I will be just as surprised as everyone else.
Well, I was going to read Scan for Life from Midnight from Beyond the Stars, which was published this year. But after those two very impressive literary readings and knowing my intellect and skill is not at that literary level, I'm going to go in a different direction and do something that hasn't been published and is more suitable to my maturity level. So,
all right, let's hear it.
It starts off with a famous line from, based on a writing exercise, so it starts off with a famous line from a very famous book some of you might recognize. Where's Papa going with that X? Jesse swung his leg over the bench to follow, but as he rose, Mama's strong hand on his shoulder sat him back down. She dug her thumb and forefinger into his cheeks and pinched so hard his mouth made fish lips. Jesse Merle Haggard Foster, how many times do I need to be telling you to mind your own business? Jesse tried to turn his head, but Mama pinched harder. Papa always asked Jesse for help chopping firewood, and Jesse could too. He could split at least 3 or 4. Okay, at least 2 logs right down the middle before his arms got all sorts of sore. Not like Papa, who could chop a mazillion, bagillion. Are you listening to me, Scowling? Mama crouched beside him. That close, he could smell the fruity lotion on her skin and something else on her breath that reminded him of that stingy stuff she poured on his knee when he skinned it chasing a possum under the porch. But Mama had her mean face on, all frowny and glaring, and Jesse knew he was in trouble even if he didn't know why. He tried to nod, but Mama's hand held his chin up. Yes, Mama. She softened then and massaged his shoulder. Never you mind your daddy's doing. She smiled. Now eat them pancakes before they catch a cold. He giggled. Pancakes can't get sick. Mama only sometimes said funny things, not like Papa, who had to be the funniest person Jesse had ever met in his life. But the distraction only lasted a moment, his mind drifting back to his father, who had disappeared around the front of the house. We don't need no wood. It's hotter than blue blazers. He didn't really know what blue blazers were, but he bet if he could touch one, his finger would melt right off. A fly landed on his plate. Get! He swung his hand down fast, stopping himself just in time before smashing the bug into a syrupy grave. Stuck in the molasses, the fly buzzed and twitched. Mama, Billy Joe says every time a fly lands, it throws up. Is that true? Mama had sat across from him at the picnic table and was chomping on an apple. She wiped juice from her chin and, still chewing, said, Don't rightly know. Jesse sighed and flicked the fly off his breakfast. Do you think I'll get the AIDS or something from Thump? Jesse froze, plastic fork in his hand hovering over the table. Whatever Papa was doing didn't sound like no wood chopping. This had less thought and more squish. And he ain't never heard no wood scream before. He swallowed. Is Papa okay? Mama smiled and leaned across the table. Papa's fine, baby. Now finish them cakes. You love pancakes. It was true. He did love pancakes, and he loved eating outside on a sunny morning, except for the flies, or when the outhouse was stinking too much. But that day was perfect. He wondered what they might do later. Go for a swim in the lake? Maybe. Another thump. Another squish. Another scream. He turned on the bench, peering at the corner of the house and willing it to vanish. Mama huffed. You know how I feel about wasting. I'm sorry, Mama. He stared down at his pancakes, no longer interested in them. It's just that if I finish my breakfast, can I go help Papa? Mama stood and put her hand on her hip. You're beginning to try my patience. Her gaze rose. And anyway, it looks like he's all done. Jesse spun around to see Papa crossing the yard in long strides. His shirt sleeves and overalls were yucky, covered in something dark and wet. Mama was going to be cross if he left those clothes lying around the house. Well, well, he said, wiping the back of his hand across his forehead and leaving a streak. What you all having over here? Jesse cringed as Papa tousled his hair. He was too old for that, and besides, Papa's hands were dirty. He tried to run his fingers through his curls, but they caught on something sticky. Mama would have to brush out the snarls if he got surf in it somehow. Pancakes, Papa said as Mama slid a plate in front of him. He nudged Jesse with his shoulder, his big white teeth shining through a bushy beard flecked with bits of meat. I do love me some pancakes. Thanks, Mama. Jesse giggled and pointed at Papa's beard. It looks like you already ate. Oh? Papa laughed, his big hearty laugh that always made Jesse laugh too. Growling like a bear, he snapped at Jesse's finger. Jesse shrieked as he pulled his hand back, then giggled some more. You can't get me. Papa ran a napkin over his chin, barely cleaning it, then poured a half a jug of syrup onto his towering stack of pancakes. Jesse wished he could eat as many pancakes as Papa when he got older. Who was it this time? Mom asked. Oil company, I think. Maybe insurance. I don't know. Papa said, pancakes stuffing his cheeks. Jesse laughed. Talking with your mouth full? Even though he'd seen Mama do it a moment ago, he couldn't tease her about it. She wasn't funny about it like Papa, but she would join him in the teasing. Papa swallowed and threw up his hands, little red snowflakes falling from his cuffs. You got me. But Mama wasn't laughing. What are we going to do with the car? I figure I'll take it apart and sell it down at old Leroy's. Should be worth something, it being one of them fancy kinds with the computers. What in the hell do you know about taking apart a car? Mama leaned toward Jessie and tapped her temple. Your father. I love him, but sometimes he don't know how to use his brain. Jessie snorted and looked at Papa, wondering what he might say to that. But Papa just stuck out his tongue, which, with the stuff on his chin, was just about the funniest thing Jessie had ever seen, especially when Papa added his googly eyes. Mama was a spoil sport, always the first to stop playing. I'll take care of it. She nodded in the direction of the front yard. What are you going to do with the rest? I was thinking same thing we did with them hikers last winter. He lowered his head and stared at his breakfast. Jessie wondered if Papa was sad. He really saw Papa sad, and he never didn't eat his food. He didn't remember any hikers, but he did remember last winter having been good hunting season and good eating. Papa tugged his beard. It's not like we ain't got no signs, Loretta. It's their own damn fault. Ronald Hank Williams Foster. Don't you be cussing in front of the boy. Papa turned to Jessie, his mouth and eyes wide open like he was scared of Mama, but Papa wasn't really scared of nothing. Jessie stuck his tongue out before his father could, and he and Papa started laughing all over again. Boys will be boys, Mama said, crossing her arms and shaking her head. But the corner of her mouth twitched, and Jessie knew she was trying not to smile. She sighed. All right, salt and ration it, but no jerky this time. Give me the poops, like you wouldn't believe. Poops? Jessie couldn't think of a funny word. Mama was really being funny that day. Not Papa funny, but... So how you feel about driving? Jessie looked at Papa, but both Papa and Mama were staring at him. He gasped, Me? We're getting a car? We're borrowing one, Mama said. It's out front. But you'll have to sit on my lap. Don't think them scrawny little legs of yours are going to reach the pedals. Jessie wasn't keen on sitting on Mama's lap. He was a big boy. The big boys don't do that. But if it meant you got to drive an honest-to-God automobile, he'd skin the rats in the crawl space for a whole month. Go on then, Mama said, shooing him. Put on your suit, and we'll drive on down to the lake for a swim. Jessie stood and froze, staring at his half-eaten breakfast. He pouted. But I didn't finish. It's okay this time. Looks like Papa's going to go on and cut us some extra provisions. Now, Jessie didn't know what provisions meant, but he smiled at Papa all the same. He turned to leave. Hold it, mister, Mama squinted at him. Plate? Oh, yeah. Jessie picked up his dish and headed over to the wash basin, scraping the leftovers into the raccoon trap before scrubbing the plate clean. It took him longer than usual because the syrup didn't want to come off. When it was finally clean, he went inside, got changed, and ran back outside. His parents were no longer at the picnic table. He hurried around front where Papa was skinning some kind of animal that didn't look so right on account it didn't have too much fur. He hoped it wasn't sick because then it might give them the AIDS. But he trusted Papa, who was such a good hunter. He wanted to be just like Papa someday. When he moved closer, a honk scared the bejeebies out of him. Mama sat behind the wheel of their brand new honest-to-God automobile. Time's a-wasting. Jessie sprinted for the front seat, filled with love for Mama and Papa, thinking he must have the bestest parents in the world. That's the end.
Thank you, Jason. And yeah, so it was Charlotte's Web, right? And I love the
Correct.
the implications of it, that like, because my instant thought was like The Shining, but I know the first line of that novel and it is not that. So I like that it had like low-key horror implications right from line one, despite being from a children's book. So well played. So Steven Belanger is next. Take it away.
All right, I'll be reading a truncated version of a story called The Zombie's Lament, which is the worst title of all time. I would retitle it The Zombie's Regret now. You'll find it in Black Chaos 2, published in 2015, edited by Bill Oliver, published by Big Pulp. So, The Zombie's Lament. David Pearson's memories come in bits and pieces. He was drunk on beer and doers, at someone's house, a party. Something bad had happened. He stumbled out of a side door and vomited. People laughed, but kept drinking and doing their own thing. Now he lay on his back in the soft, dewy grass, happy in his deep sadness. He sees a pair of old brown shoes with dried bloodstains on them, caked to the laces, thick, hairy legs, ripped jeans, blue and red plaid shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, palms and hands dripping blood. He wants to move, but he's paralyzed in his sad drunkenness, and the grass feels so cold, so refreshing, so good, so peaceful. The misshapen red and purple splotched face layering over Dave's drips bloody drool and saliva and a red piece of somebody's something onto his lips and cheeks. Before he can scream, the man's bloodied beard and flesh-covered teeth fill his vision. A suffocating stench of rotting meat, a scorching pain as the thing bites into his neck and shoulder, and then there's no more. For a while, he thinks. Then there's the bend of Main Street and the fire station on his right. It's nighttime now, and he's stumbling. A darkness. Then the frozen, white-topped cove is on his left. Very distantly, he remembers the burned and crumbling barge that had been there before it sank forever into the cold, deep water. Darkness. He's climbing the wide slabs of stone, steps from the street to his house. It's an effort to take his key out as he's shambling up the front steps. After many moments, he realizes how cold he is, colder even than he should be, without a coat and walking for about an hour on a winter night. He's inside. The staircase is almost insurmountable. He knows he's dying. He wonders how much blood he's lost. He wonders if he's already dead. He falls into his bed and he sleeps. Sort of. They say your life flashes before your eyes as you die, but for Dave, it's a viewmaster of images of the past few weeks. Each scene comes with a surge of sadness and regret that hurt more than his shoulder, head, and neck. And it's all very slow, slower than death. The first, a writer's group, familiar faces of bald and sophisticated Kenny, thin and sad and sultry Sheila, the cute and smiling Emma, and Susie, first and last, always Susie. Her pale skin, freckles that prettied her face like artsy dots of a Jackson Pollock, strawberry blonde hair, and a shy, knowing smile. And Dave remembers he'd been drinking and eating too much, sleeping too little, since Susie left him. His friend Joe calls, says he's throwing a party, says Susie will be there. Now's your chance to patch it up, Joe says to him. Except, once they're there, she frowns at him, at his sloppy appearance and his bloodshot eyes. He's already half in the bag from hours of drinking over a lot of days. Later, Susie drives away as he staggers out that side door of Joe's house. Her old Ford Escort almost clips a man walking drunkenly on the road. Dave sees him seeing this and then watches himself sink to the cold, welcoming grass and get bitten again by the shambling man, who later bites old Mrs. O'Grady down the street and 17-year-old Jennifer Potter as she tries to sneak back into her parents' house at 3 a.m. Dave stares at the ceiling as the shambling man, as Dave now refers to him, tries to cross the ice over Old Mill Cove, falls through a thin spot, and flows very slowly, so peacefully slow, under the ice, into the bay, into the ocean. The images disappear. Dave drifts until he hears a cop say, "Were you in any condition to drive at the time, sir?" to somebody downstairs. It's not his home after all. Where is he? He's wide awake now and angry. He sees Susie crying, her pretty face just leaking tears. Of all the horrible things she's done to him, of all the terrible things she said to him, the one comment he remembers now most from their fights is when he said, but no, he can't remember it. He doesn't want to see it. The shame of it, the rage engulfs him, and he wills it away. She'd been hurtful to him at the end. She'd probably cheated on him, and they never would have worked out anyway. But the shame of how he'd let it end, the regret of his wasted relationship, his wasted life. Startled, Dave realizes his shame and anger are keeping him alive. That and a certain thirst, a hunger that feeds upon his anger and shame. If it all has to end, he thinks, I don't want it to end like this. Her crying face again. You know what I'm most sorry about? He remembers her saying to him a few days before she left him. I'm sorry I couldn't get you to care more about your life. You could have done more with yourself. You're not dumb. Dave sits upright in his bed, his fury building. The more Susie sobs and the more Joe talks, the angrier he gets. Who's he talking to? I will swing my legs over, he thinks, and I will stand. The officer says something downstairs that he can't make out. Yeah, that's Dave, Joe says. All hammer and nails and beer, just like me and those other guys. He could always nail down a deck. but he could never nail down a permanent job or a girl. He stands and turns. Stiff as a board, as they say, but he grasps for the doorknob. The door swings open and he steps into the hallway. Any idea what bit him? Joe asks. He sits on the couch, facing the cop, who's standing in front of him, holding open a little pad and writing on it with a blue bic. Might have been a fox or a wolf, the cop says. If you have any small pets, I'd be careful when I let them out. Okay, Joe says. Susie's got a cat. I'll let her know. The cop folded his pad and closed his pen. If I need to get in touch with you about this man that she says she saw when she drove away, I can reach her at your place right here, right? You bet, officer. And you're sure he didn't know that she'd been staying with you since they broke up? Absolutely, Dave Pearson hears his so-called friend, Joe Nuxall, say with fake solemnity. I know how it looks, officer, but I didn't do anything to him. Susie kept saying she wanted to go back to him, that she missed him, she loved him, and all that. I just wanted her to see how he was, how he gets when he drinks. I hate to speak ill of the dead, but I always told her he cheated on her. She just needed to see it for herself. Dave's jawbone splinters on both sides of his face when he opens his mouth. Both men listen to the stillness of the house. The officer turns toward the stairs. His eyes widen as he drops pad and pen and reaches for his gun. Joe stands and looks up in surprise, inexplicably taking out his cell phone, maybe to call for the police, who's standing right there. Dave separates from the darkness of the upstairs hallway and stands beneath the light of the small round ceiling fixture above him. Green and white growths pepper Dave's face and neck. The skin of his back and butt sag like a bag of water, and his chin rests on his collarbone like Jacob Marley's ghost. Both feet flop as he walks, like they dangle from broken ankles. Pieces of muscle and bone protrude from his shoulder and neck, like something had burst out of him. Jaw muscles shred and vocal cords snap as a deep guttural growl comes from a voice box that no longer works. I heard you. Dave jumps down the steps. The landing jars every bone in his body, breaking several. The orbital socket of his right eye cracks, and the eye bulges like an egg from the side, almost slipping out. He brushes the cop out of the way. Joe's screams are cut off as Dave takes the cell phone with his right hand and Joe's neck with his left. He dials a number he knows well as he feels bullets penetrate his back, popping sounds from far away. Susie's phone rings and Joe's neck snaps. Dave holds on. Joe's chin hits his rigged hand, his body a limp doll, his feet dragging on the floor. Dave swings his body in front of him like a shield, and it takes a few bullets in the back and out the stomach. Hello, Susie says. Dave forces out a low sandpaper voice that shreds his larynx and throat. Blood flows into his chest and out of the left corner of his mouth and down his long chin to his collarbone. Susie, it's Dave. I'm so sorry I said that, baby. I'm so sorry I said that about the bus. The cop circles around him. The next bullet enters Dave's heart through his back. He hears a paper-tearing rip as it exits his upper chest. Black, sludgy blood trickles from both wounds. He releases Joe's neck. The body hits the floor like a heavy load, but he still holds the phone. Susie's cries echo in the room. The next shot blows away his sagging chin and much of his neck in a spray of black blood and brittle bone. He falls to the floor and he remembers. It was an ugly end. All they shared was anger, bitterness, hatred. Susie paces in the small hallway outside their bedroom door, her arms flailing in exasperation, calling him an idiot for how he was about to lose her. He stands in front of her, facing her, his right hand on the doorknob, recalling she had once told him she'd been in special ed in high school after her parents divorced because she'd been depressed and she'd just shut down. She had to take the small yellow bus for 2 weeks until a meeting with a school psychologist exited her from the program. Me, he says. Me? I'm not the idiot. I'm not the one who had to take the retard bus to school. That just proves how stupid you are, how stupid you've always been. His mouth freezes on the last word, not believing what he's heard himself just say. She just stands there, shaking, her pretty face wet with tears. Look, she pleads, that didn't really happen, okay? I was just kidding when I said that, so you don't have to mention it anymore, okay? The cop puts the muzzle against his skull and shoots. A mushy spot mushrooms and then explodes on the right side of his head beneath his close-cut, thinning brown hair. Blood, bone, and a black and milky yellow substance splatter the floor and leak down his face. This river swims with little black flies he hadn't noticed before. He rolls over and lays on his back on the floor, feeling his life, his blood, his brain spilling out onto the wood. Still, somehow, he clutches the phone. He hears the cop's voice calling for backup, his frantic footsteps close to his face. He hears static from the walkie-talkie, something about biting, and a panic. He couldn't see anything, and all noise was fading to a permanent nothing. You weren't stupid, he whispers to Susie's cries. I was stupid. I was. I always was. He drifts in the cold water of the cove, peacefully beneath the ice. Before he dies again, this time for good, he hears Susie say, "That's okay, baby. That's okay." The front door opens. There's screaming and snarling and more shots fired. But David Pearson flows peacefully in the freezing water, his face pressed against the solid ice, a smile on his face. He lets the soothing cold water carry him, slowly and with ease, into the bay, into the ocean, into the beyond. That's it. Thank you.
It was great how what different types of work we're getting tonight, and they're all so awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
All right, our last reader for the evening is Curtis M. Lawson.
Hi. I've been trying to figure out what I'm going to read this whole time. And I think I should probably read from Blackheart Boys Choir because there's a hardcover edition up for pre-order from Weird House Press and people should buy it. So I want to read from that. So I will just start and we'll see how far I can get in 10 minutes. The end of the world, in my experience, is a microcosmic event. Oh, my screen closed. I'm so sorry. I'm having tech issues here. Try that again. The end of the world, in my experience, is a microcosmic event. It is an intimate experience rather than the cold and dry ultimate chapter in history. Armageddon is not a pandemic wiping out mankind. It is one man's illness driving him to a makeshift gallows. Ragnarok is not a final war, but the pain and fear of a single soldier bleeding out, far from home. And divine retribution is not the indiscriminate flooding of a world, but personal, up-close violence against the guilty. The end of the world, as it expresses itself at this place and in this time, is set to music. My choir sings as one, and bodies fall around us, each a universe unto itself, now forever extinguished. Brimstone hail rips through arteries and organs. Our voices shatter bone and coax blood from every orifice. All the while Amdusius, rising from the burning pit below, greedily sups upon death. If this night is remembered, history will judge it as a mass tragedy of nameless victims, but it is so much more than that. Each death, when you think of it, is cosmic in proportion. For every microcosm destroyed, a shockwave echoes out across familial bonds and through the collective consciousness of man, wreaking havoc across countless vistas of reality. The ashes of our sheet music blow across the floor, but with each drop of blood and every scream, Amdusius, our infernal conductor, reveals a new note. We are not immune to the disastrous hymn we sing. Burning hail tears at our flesh and shreds our insides, but our voices stay strong. No one sings too sharp or flat. No one loses time. They've come such a long way, my choir. Richard Wagner once proposed the construction of a theater on the Rhine for the performance of his Ring Cycle. The 4 operas performed on consecutive nights would be concluded with the theater in flames. A perfect cadence. Like Wagner's dream, our final theater is in flames. Disco lights and the amber glow of hellfire refract through stagnant water wept from iron pipes above. The sprinklers are impotent against the inferno, but the droplets glow like hellish fairies, adding a deeper layer of theatricality to our performance. Our victims flee in rudderless panic. They trample the dead and dying, all pretense of virtue and morality squashed beneath the threat of oblivion. I hope that a few of them might look around before their deaths and see themselves as I do, a gathering of vermin, a writhing rat king. Ari Cole's face explodes, and bloody tears of satisfaction roll down my cheeks. One note resolved. Asher, our fearless percussionist, falls dead upon his final snare hit of the crescendo. His death howl is another note brought into discord. F, twice below middle C, accompanies my sustained D sharp, and I feel some organ burst behind my ribs. I'm dying. Of that there is no doubt. The song is nearly complete, however, and I will sing until this body fails. Even as the reaper's scythe teases my face, I have no fear. I shall be immortal in my art, the best parts of me captured in stave and song. Neither death nor hell can undo that magic. Soon Amducius, my muse and betrayer, will try to sup upon my synaptic end. He will find nothing, though, but a dead black heart. My world ended years ago, long before this night of victory and suffering. And what's this story really? And that's what this story is really about, isn't it? How one person's suffering can amplify and resonate like a song shared with the world. First 15 years of my life speed before my vision. Most of it is inconsequential humdrum, alongside minor tragedies and snippets of happiness, though I'm able to pick out highlights here and there. My father singing to me as a baby and a toddler, my first day of school, a family trip to Manhattan, the day my father stopped singing. The rest goes by in dizzying blur, sounds and smells, the juniper smell of gin, the hook from a Beethoven piece, a sunset over the Boston skyline. Then time dilates, and I find myself at the end of this past summer. Is this where it all began? The beginning of the end for Enfield, Massachusetts? Is this the moment we began our death march? Or was it further back still, when Gravetree and my father, like the musical equivalents of John Dee and Edward Kelly, uncovered the magical of the world's end? Or maybe in the ancient days when Amducius stood beside Lucifer and took up arms against God Almighty? It's inconsequential, I suppose. This is the time my mind has brought me to. My mother has just about drunk away all the money from the father left us, and the royalty checks from his recordings are both meager and inconsistent. We both have to make sacrifices if we are to get by, or so I'm told. That means moving out of our big house on Raylene Street and acclimating to a 2-bedroom condo across town that can't accommodate father's baby grand. With the move comes a change of schools. The academy was putting too much of a dent into our dwindling savings, which means my senior year will be spent at Swift River High, a drab public school full of students with drab aspirations. As for mother, the profit from the equity from the house on Raylene Street allows her to maintain her diet of wine and pills without the burden of looking for a job. So I suppose all she needs to sacrifice is my last bit of respect for her. Yes, she is losing the big house too, but it's not as if she ever leaves her bedroom. I don't plan on sticking around after graduation. I'm thinking I'll go to New York and seek out some of father's contacts. But maybe Chicago or London, neither are out of the question. Even if I only move as far as Boston proper, I'll need a good chunk of money come June. There's a record store in town, one of the only tidbits of culture in Enfield, and I convinced the owner to give me a summer job. It doesn't pay much, which is understandable. Customers rarely come in, and those who do are mostly bearable. It's older folks mainly. Post-college hipsters, elderly jazz aficionados, and some scumbag named Leo who buys house music with the money he makes selling dope at a gas station nearby. The slim body of customers often comment on my precocious charm, though using the word precocious for a 16-year-old strikes me as a bit condescending. I wonder how the owner, an old hippie named Jonas, manages to keep the lights on. The financials of the record store aren't my concern, however, and a rarity of customers suits me just fine. It gives me a chance to be out of our tiny condo with the broken air conditioner and far away from my mother. It's usually slow enough that I can spend the day doodling portraits of my favorite composers and daydreaming of joining their ranks. Also, I'm surrounded by music. Some of it is the pop trash from some bygone generation or another, but Jonas occasionally lets me play what I like, and I uncover a few gems. The soundtrack to A Clockwork Orange, featuring 2 movements from Beethoven's Ninth, Das Rheingold, conducted by Sir George Solti, Sir John Eliot Gardiner's rendition of the Mass in B minor. Although the store caters almost exclusively to adults, the occasional high school student pops in. I know most of them only by face. All my friends are from the academy, so I never bothered socializing in my hometown. Nevertheless, they all seem to know me. They walk the aisles of the shop, talking in Irish whispers about my family's misfortune. Jenny, look, it's that weird kid who always wears a suit. The CD I'm swapping out of the stereo snaps in my hands. I heard his whole family is nuts, and he goes to some school for like really troubled kids. I hold 2 jagged crescents. They shine with chromatic brilliance. My mom said his dad killed himself and his mother blew through all their money. I guess they had to sell that big house on Ray Lane. That must be why he's working here. I dive across the counter on top of Jenny. She screams and her breath is hot on and sweet on my face. I snatch her tongue between two fingers and saw through it with the serrated edge of a broken dollar bin Mozart CD. And I think that's about 10 minutes, so I'll stop it there.
Stopping with sawing through the tongue with a Mozart CD? Come on. Fabulous. All right, everyone, those were so wonderful. And Curtis, the hardcover that you said is coming out. You're absolutely right. Everyone should buy that. I've also read your novel, and it's phenomenal. So can't wait for that hardcover edition to come out. And congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I did just want to close out by thanking our readers and thanking the people that were dropping in and watching and listening to these wonderful readings. And then to say that we are planning, as the HWA Rhode Island chapter, to on January 19th do, it is January 19th, right, Josh? Yeah. We are doing a series of readings in honor of Edgar Allan Poe's birthday. So we're all very excited about that. Everyone's already planning readings, both personal readings written by the members of our chapter, and I believe we're going to have a few interludes of Poe's writing and Poe's works himself. I also totally think there should be costumes and various like crow appearances. We have to gussy that reading up as much as we can. It'll be fun. But yeah, does anybody, any of our readers have any comments or things they want to say or share?
Just a big thank you. Thank you, Christa, and thank you everybody for reading and for showing up tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right.
And just to say, they're all great stories too.
Yeah, it was a blast.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, I will end the broadcast. Thank you again. And everyone have wonderful holidays, whatever you celebrate, or if you don't celebrate, wonderful winter. And yeah, have a great night.
Thank you.